Welcome back to A Slice of News, where I cut you off a slice of news. The Department of Justice released additional Epstein files, and if you thought what they released before was bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. These were some of the clearest evidence that some of the most awful ideas of what might have gone on Epstein's island were actually entirely true. There are even some things I think no one even considered having happened because they were just so out there and so unthinkable. It's been practically common knowledge that sexual abuses did occur on Epstein's island, perpetrated by Jeffrey Epstein and his associates, one of which reportedly being current President Donald Trump. But these newly released files detailed exactly what they were, reportedly from the people who experienced them. And they did not leave anything up to the imagination. They said exactly what reportedly happened and to whom. There were accounts of assaults and abuses, but there were also accounts of actual murders, claiming that several girls were killed on the island and buried, even some accounts of girls disappearing entirely and never being seen. Some pretty awful stuff, so awful that I don't think I could even get into it here. But of course it goes without saying, it's very bad and very damning. What made this release different from their previous releases, other than the level of detail and specificity of what went on with those in attendance at Epstein's compound, the department did not spend the time to redact every single mention of Donald Trump from the files. So as a result, if you were to read those release files, you would see his name come up a lot as the perpetrator of some of the most heinous and awful acts detailed in those files, which is why it may come as no surprise that shortly after releasing these files, the Department of Justice then immediately deleted them from the area of their website where they had previously placed for public access. And I can understand if this was a courtroom drama and this was presented as evidence, it would be a virtual assured conviction for the accused because it was that damning and that specific as to the crimes being committed and who they were being committed by, in this case, President Donald Trump. If it were a TV show, the judge would read out the conviction and they would be cheering and hugging, and the accused would be led off in shame and in handcuffs. But this isn't a fictional TV courtroom. It's real life, and that's not what's going to happen. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on which side you're on, despite the fact that the Department of Justice deleted these released files from their website, many online were able to download and preserve the files before they were able to be removed from the Department of Justice website. So copies of these potentially incriminating files remain in the public view, despite the Department of Justice's attempt to remove and cover them up. So these files are still out there. The question that we're left now with is, does that matter? For quite some time, I remained strongly confident the Epstein files are going to be the thing to finally awaken these MAGA people from their Trump trance. When they saw in detail the level of depravity and abuse Donald Trump, Epstein, and their associates perpetrated upon these innocent young girls, they would at long last turn their back on him, because as a party and a people who believe in protecting the children, they could not possibly allow a man who represented everything they were against to be their man, their leader. He would quite literally be exposed as the man they were supposedly wanting to protect children against. But what I'd failed to entirely account for was just how deep the indoctrination went, to a point where they could be presented with the reality of what those files depict and the awful things that he did. And the response could be, I don't think it's real, and even if it is, I don't care. I expected them to be incensed. Instead, I found they were at most apathetic to it. The truth to them only mattered if they believed it, and they chose simply not to believe it. They knew the man Donald Trump was before he ran for president and while he was running for president. They heard the Access Hollywood tape. They heard the claims by former teen beauty pageant contestants that Donald Trump would regularly come into their dressing rooms and view them while they were undressed and underage. The nearly 30 women that accused Donald Trump of various types of sexual assault and misconduct knew about the numerous inappropriate comments he made about his own daughter when she was still only a child, such as that if she was not his daughter, he might consider dating her in a few years, or telling a crowd at the Miss Teen USA pageant that his daughter was hot, and didn't they think she was hot? All that, and they could still say, well, better him than the Democrat. Not just once, but 3 times. Maybe in hindsight it was too much to hope that the details of what he did on Epstein's island would have any effect on them. There seems genuinely nothing Donald Trump could say or do that could possibly lose their unwavering support for him. The content of these recently released Epstein files would be the death of any other politician's career, and almost assuredly have them looking at a criminal conviction and prison time. But once again, we see Donald Trump is not any other politician, and the standards have changed. 30 years ago, Bill Clinton received extramarital mouth stuff and then denied it before Congress, and people wanted him out of office for it. While here we have accounts of Donald Trump doing things only trained medical professionals are supposed to do, and many things trained medical professionals are absolutely not supposed to do, and they are entirely silent on their calls for his removal. The accounts in these recently released Epstein files could not be worse for Donald Trump unless he had personally strangled some of these girls to death, though the only account of that is of former Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous host Robin Leach having reportedly strangled a girl to death, which they then buried somewhere on the island. The revelations in these files and the numerous namings of Donald Trump should have been the end of him. But it seems painfully clear that they aren't, because supporters don't want it to be. It's been shown that Donald Trump is the most vile of the vile, and everything they supposedly stood against and everything they accused the Democrats of being. But accepting that fact would mean everything fell apart for them. It would throw into question everything they believed, or at least wanted to believe. If Donald Trump is not the upstanding, godly man protecting them all from the demonic Democrats, their entire worldview gets thrown into question. So instead they do what many others do when confronted with a truth they simply do not want to accept, which is to deny and ignore it, and then fill it in with whatever the administration tells them the truth is. If Trump says he's innocent, then he must be, because the alternative is too horrible to consider. And I guess that's what I failed to consider. I thought that the Epstein files would show them the truth, and they would at long last decry him for the awful man that he is and always has been. But I didn't think that it would reveal him to be so awful that they simply could not accept what it told them, and they would simply at all. And they just double down on their fantasy that Donald Trump is a great man who is doing what's best for America, and he is their chosen guy. It seems depressingly and painfully clear that there truly is nothing that can break them out of that delusion, that can convince them that Donald Trump is so bad that they should stop supporting him entirely. We are at a point where facts and reality do not matter to them unless it is the facts and reality that they want to believe, that they choose to accept. They truly seem unreachable, which is the most frustrating thing. There was always the hope that maybe if there was something in those files that was so bad that it could convince them to turn away from Trump, that things could maybe get back on track. But it's now clear that there is no such thing, and there is nothing that could get them to turn away from him, that their support is eternal through anything, no matter how horrendous the accusations may be. So given that fact, the question really is, where do we go from here? If we've got a whole section of the population that is more interested in living in denial of the realities that they find themselves in, and more interested in living the fantasy that Donald Trump and his administration are actually good for them and good for the country, instead of probably the worst human being to ever sit in the president's seat. And I wish I had a good answer, but I really don't. Maybe the answer is to just give up on them entirely. Just give them up as lost and focus on voters and potential voters on the right that are not quite as deeply bought into the mega Trump cult, as it were. I think those are the people who still have the ability to have their minds and perceptions changed by the revelations found in these recently released files. Because I know they're out there, not nearly as many as perhaps I would like there to be, or hope there were, but I know there are some. The stuff in those files was absolutely abominable, horrendous, and even if only half turned out to be 100% verifiably true, which I think it's much more, but even if it was only half, that should be more than enough to say this man is so awful that we cannot allow him to continue to be our president. And in a more sane and just world, that's exactly what would happen. But I also recognize that's not the world we live in, and that is not what's going to happen. I am dismayed and disappointed by the reaction to these files from those on the right. But the one thing that I'm not is surprised, since this is exactly on brand for them. Because if there's one thing conservatives and those on the right have always seemingly struggled with, it's to admit when they were wrong, when they got, when they were fooled. So rather than let their ego and sense of self be put into question, they simply will deny it and continue to live in self-imposed ignorance. And that is frankly never the right decision. And in the end, I hope I'll be proven wrong, and there will be genuine consequence for the things that we are finding in these files. But I'm not holding my breath, because that is simply not the way things go these days. Accountability is simply something that no longer exists when it comes to this administration and this president in particular. But I'll keep hopeful that while they may be getting away with it now, they will not get away with it forever, and true justice will be done. Eventually. Alright guys, that'll be it for this episode of A Slice of News. I've been your host, Mr. Slice, and until next time when I cut you off another Slice of News. And don't forget to rate and review the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.